Okay, so today, well, first off, I'm Brittany, and this is Metaphysical Files of True Crime, and today we are talking about Ed Kemper.
And I'm Joanna.
Woohoo! Okay, so before we even get started, as per usual, let's go ahead and start with, first off, Ed Kemper is alive.
Yes.
And so for those of you that are wondering, how can you tap into somebody's energy while they're still alive? Well, guess what? There's readings that happen all the time. You can read energy. Energy is accessible to anyone. You just have to pick up the essence or the undertones that are not physically in front of you. So with that said, today we are going to be talking about Mr. Ed Kemper and what exactly happened in his life and what led to whatever we're going to be talking about. And I've already started working on tapping into the energy. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you now and let you just kind of ramble about the summary.
Okay, so Ed Kemper was born in December of 1948. He was an American serial killer who targeted mostly college students who were women in 1972 to 1973, and he was also dubbed the co-ed killer. He was convicted of 8 murders. That includes his grandparents, 6 young women, and his mother. And in 1973, he actually turned himself into the police. So he wasn't caught. He turned himself in, which is really interesting to me.
Okay. Yeah, well, so, with that said, let's kind of ramble a little bit about, his world so far. So I tapped into his energy, and right off the bat, I'm feeling very, right today in this moment, I'm feeling disassociated from my body. Like, I don't feel very connected. I know, you had mentioned he had some health problems going on that would make sense if he was feeling a disassociation.
Yeah.
However, the other thing of this is I'm in a good mood, and in recent years, a very good mood. And I keep hearing like music again, like Soundgarden music. I think the last thing when we tapped into his energy earlier, it was Black Hole Sun by Soundgarden.
Soundgarden, yes.
And I feel like that was a very symbolic song for what he felt most of his life, where he felt alone. He felt like he couldn't get out of the hole that he had created. And within that too, there's just all kinds of music. I keep seeing like records and just like everything about music. And I'm wondering if that's something. I know we couldn't find any research on that, but I'm wondering if that's a lot to do with his own life and like where he's been and what he like. Because I don't get from him that he is in the same energy that he was in when the crimes occurred. However, with that said, I do feel like I have an addiction. I can't get rid of the addiction, and I don't know what else to do other than to deal with the fact that I can't get rid of this addiction.
That's really interesting, because I know even when he has come up for parole, he has denied his own parole because he says he's unfit for the outside world. So I think he knows he has this addiction. But I also think that his last death that he had committed was the death of his mother. And then after that, he turned himself in. So I think that kind of like ended that cycle for him. And I feel like he might have felt that any of the killings after that would have kind of just been not useless, but he wouldn't have gotten the same feeling out of it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, that makes
yeah.
sense. Well, and you know what I think is even more interesting is that like so I'm feeling into like one of the core wounds that he has, right? And I'm getting strongly like there's something wrong with me, and I'm bad, and I feel like and he's very, 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 very smart. Like freaking just like amazingly smart. But it's like and the awareness that he has too. And I have to stress, to me, when we're talking about intelligence level, I look more at the emotional intelligence of a person, because that will dictate how they really will behave. Like we talked about Gary Ridgway, his emotional intelligence level was very low.
Right.
And so because of it being low and his emotions, he was at the swing of his own emotions, at the whim of it. His awareness of things around him was extremely low. And so that made him do things that maybe other people would be like, well, I would have never done that if I was going to do that, but that's not what I get from Ed Kemper. And I feel strongly that if he had not turned himself in, I don't know that he would really be caught, because he had more of a, he had a way of kind of like, just pulling the wool over others' eyes and just kind of going in between the cracks, so to speak.
He was also known as like a master manipulator. And that's what, he had a lot of friends who were cops, even while he was killing these women. The cops said they would never have suspected him of anything. He also worked with the FBI, helping set up profiling on serial killers. And they also mentioned that he was very in tune to other people's emotions and feelings and fear. And they believe that he used that as a way to gain control over his victims and make them feel like they were safe with him. So they were saying that he was very smart, and he used his strengths to gain control over women. And I think you're right. I think if he never turned himself in because of how smart he is, I think he'd still be out there.
Well, or it would have been, with our justice system, it would have probably been pinned on somebody else, and then, it fascinates me because there's a level of, I don't want to say remorse. That's not the right word. It feels like there's a level of guilt and shame that he carries, and I feel like he doesn't. And right now, I can't stress enough, I feel so disconnected from my body and his energy, and it feels almost like I get a little bit of apathy of what's the point of my life, and so from more of the dark or the negative side of it, I can see where it would be overwhelming for him, and I'm getting pain in my in my throat down into my chest area, and I just feel very strained, strained, it's hard to communicate right now. So if I was sitting in front of him, that would be what I would talk about. But there is, interestingly enough, I would hands down sit in front of David Berkowitz. I could be alone in a room with David Berkowitz, wouldn't think twice about him actually wanting to hurt me. Ed Kemper, I wouldn't want to sit in a room alone, just because I feel like he, however, I will say it with this thought too. I feel like he does have more self-control than all the other serial killers, and I know we're nearing the end of the serial killers series part of this.
Right.
And it just blows my mind because his whole energy, what he did is messed up, and there's a perversion of his energy, and I get he was very opportunistic. He kind of reminds me of, how some, oh my gosh, when I was raised, and this is interesting, I feel like this is very significant. I was raised one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and so we had these certain Bible standards that we had to apply. You could even touch certain parts of your body without being considered unclean and that being it a sin, and then you would need to go talk to the elders and the congregation about what you touched and why you touched it, if you're catching my wavelength. And if you watched things that were inappropriate, you also had to report it to the elders and have a conversation with the elders, and then they would have to pull out Bible scriptures, and you were reprimanded for it. And there was this movie scene, my gosh, I think it was Vikings or some sort of movie where they portrayed this man he was a prince or something like that, and he was kneeling down in front of this Catholic altar, and he had been cheating on his wife, so he had this mistress, and he took a whip and he was whipping himself as self-punishment. I get that same context of energy coming off of Ed Kemper. So number one, there's definitely religious, scrutiny in his background, where there was a construct of some sort of indoctrination that's coming from his lineage, not just from this lifetime, but we're talking ancestral, where there was a lot of scrutiny about how we right from wrong, how we apply our moral standards, and we do good. However, I don't know what we know about this, but what's coming through is thief, like a thief. And I feel like that we're talking about a family member. I don't know if that would be a parent, but I keep thinking about a thief. And that is also in his lineage. That's so interesting because the content, and maybe this is coming more so from spirit. Let me feel into this part. But the fact that the word thief keeps coming up, you know, when you think of the context of a thief, they believe that they are not worthy for the thing that they're trying to take. That's why they're trying to cheat the system and take it. You know, and that very essence of that whole thing is it's a self-worth issue, you know, and the fact that I'm seeing that in his energy is both, I think, literal and symbolic here. Symbolic in the sense of, you know, there's a lineage for him where, you know, the family felt they had to take things that didn't belong to them because they felt that they weren't worthy of the things that they had. And that goes into context with his father. And there's like a deep father wound because my left kidney has started to go off, and I feel like his father felt like he could never be enough. He could never be good enough. He would be more prone to like fraud, stealing things, almost like kleptomaniac type of energy. And it's because he felt like he could not amount to more. That he could, and because of that scarcity mindset. That's part of the lineage. And then interestingly enough, if I look at Ed Kemper's mother, this is all you know, kind of intersecting into you know, a woman who, there's lineage attached to this too, but a woman who feels like she's meant for royalty, like she's meant for the greatest things in life, but could never really amount to those things, which is why she attracted in the you know, Ed Kemper's father, who never felt like he could amount to anything. And there's past life energy that's actually linked to both of them, meaning the parents. It's linking more into like a religious, you know, like aspect and like hierarchy, like archbishop, or you know, some sort of like bishop, like or relative of the bishop, where they're in that more of a higher level of status that's above the common people. And when I look deeper into it, though, there was trauma where they were never recognized, they never got the recognition that they deserved, and they never felt acknowledged. And so because of that, they carried some of that energy and that lineage into this lifetime. And I can see as early as like 10 years old for mom, she never felt like she could, she felt rejected and judged.
Okay, yeah, so I did confirm that Kemper's paternal grandfather was reported to be a con man and a thief. So that was right on right there. A lot of small various crimes. And also his dad, who was an electrician, often stole things on the job.
Fascinating. That was such a specific thing too. Like I was thinking in my head, I'm like, is this literal or symbolic? Why am I talking about thievery in his energy? But it was just so blatantly like right in front of me. Like, but it's also symbolic because like when you really don't think you're worthy for things, then you feel like you have to cheat the system because you can't get them the right way and in a healthy way. And that kind of leads into and that's a lineage thing. That's not just like a, you know, like a one time, it's just this generation acting that way. It's coming from generation acting that way. It's coming from pain that from each, you know, generation who feels like they can't amount to more. And also it comes from the fact that they feel like they can never find their sense of direction and that they were dealt a terrible hand, like, so they feel helpless and victimized by the world around them. And it's so sad that that's what they went through. And so, I mean, you know, I don't want to, you know, take away from the victims that, you know, experienced, you know, the hand of Ed Kemper, but I also want to reiterate here that we're talking about humans. You know, from one human to another in these acts that are committed. This isn't meant to condone the behavior, but I'm humanizing a lot of what we consider evil or atrocious, you know, in some ways, because we need to understand that there's both a psychology side to this, but there's also a very spiritual side to why we are behaving in these ways.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, and so then, so with that said, with the thievery thing, it would automatically, that energy is so potent. It's not that Ed Kemper had to see that happening, but it's a lineage thing. It's within the DNA that's been passed to Ed Kemper. And so that's a struggle for Ed Kemper that he has to figure out how he navigates the world. And think about how much that must have been difficult choosing this bodysuit. One might even ask, why does a soul choose a body that has a brain that honestly can commit a murder like that? Because there's a lot of research that's been done from neuroscience, even, where there's been a lot of brain studying and scanning of brains of like a person who actually commits a murder versus someone who does not go through with that.
Right.
And there's a lot of rewiring in the brain too, and it kind of makes me feel like, in some ways, some of the people that actually go through and commit that don't always have the impulse control to, you know, to release that compulsion. But with Ed Kemper, it doesn't feel like a compulsion. It feels like an addiction, which is completely different from what, like, again, because we just did Gary Ridgway. It's like Gary Ridgway was compulsive. Like, it was impulsive energy, and he could not stop himself to save his life. And he was, you know, sloppy at times because he was so enraged. And, you know, vibration is not measured necessarily at just like this joy, peace, love, and gratitude. It's also, we have to factor in some of the more potent, heavy emotions that we experience on a regular basis, such as rage or, you know, like a hot temper. That in and of itself is also the polarity of a high vibration as well. And that has deep impact, like a ripple effect on the world.
And it's so funny that you brought up rage, because that's how Ed Kemper described killing women, was that it helped release the rage that he had towards his mother.
And I would imagine he felt uncomfortable with the heaviness of the emotions, because I don't get from his mom and from his dad that they actually like had emotional regulation tools, or they had there was a lot of scrutiny, religious scrutiny. It's like about like, well, we have to do this, and it has to look like this, and it has to it's a long line of family judgment, family conflict, shame. And if you think about the context of shame, you know, shame, it can be many different types of shame, but this feels like it's about something inherently is wrong with us, and we are going to behave in this way. And I got to be honest, something came up. You know, number one, we've had a lot of distractions during this podcast. And even the last time we tried to record this podcast, we had a lot of distractions that came up. And, you know, like, can I be a little bit honest?
Yes.
Okay. So Joe and I, you know, like, sometimes we don't see eye to eye. We're both very stubborn, and so sometimes when we're doing these podcast episodes, you know, some of the energy, because it's so potent and heavy, if we are both not in the same framework of like, you know, I guess you could say more like a sound of mind, sometimes it makes for some agitation in the energy, and so Joe went to get up and go answer the door, which is a normal thing. I was fine with it the first time. I'm like, it'll be just like a one-time thing. Well, it turned into like a 3-4 time event where she was having to get up. and I was just like irritated.
A little bit.
You know, being in Ed Kemper's energy, I'm like very frustrated. I care about being respected.
Yeah.
And if you are going to, and I believe I even use verbiage I don't normally use, if you're going to be here, be here.
Yes.
Be present with me here. You know, don't commit to something you cannot handle. And as I kept talking about it, I had this epiphany of like, wait a second. I'm not upset that she kept getting up. I'm upset that she won't take accountability for getting up. you know, because it was like you were kind of like not really, you know, like it was like you were like, well, I had to get up because of this and this and this and this, and it was like deflecting the your accountability level. And then I'm just like, wait a second, you have a choice in everything that you do on a daily basis, right down to like getting up or not getting up for this. Like you can choose to not get up. So I guess like, but as I was talking to you about it, I had like an epiphany, because I'm like, number one, this is Ed Kemper's energy. There was a rage and anger and agitation that he had towards his mother, because his mother lacked accountability. She had no way of taking accountability for her own actions. She was not powerful in the way of, like empowerment and self-love and everything like that. She was powerful in the sense of rage, hatred, judgment, very, very narcissistic energy.
Yeah.
And an inability to take accountability for any actions that she took in her life. And as a result of that, she then blamed everybody else for being the problem. And this was long before Ed Kemper was even born into this earth. But I imagine growing up, a lot of us can, a lot of the listeners and even you and I can relate to having, scrutiny of a family member who doesn't have the ability to take the accountability for their actions. And if you think about that, that is such a result of shame.
Right.
Because the more shame that you carry, right, you got to be real good at blaming other people, because you can't hold that kind of level of shame on yourself. Like, so it's easier to then blame somebody else for being the culprit or the reason why you feel the way that you do, right? But the problem is when you start blaming somebody, you give away all your power to that person. And like we were just talking about, everything's a choice. So when you start excusing away the choices that you made, then you are subtly giving away your power. And it's giving off a lack of self-respect at that point. So then the people around you devalue you or disrespect you at that point. And in Ed Kemper's energy, I feel like there is a lot of feelings like, I am not going to be respected. I want to be respected. That irked him so much. And his mom, I heard, oh, Ed, you could be so much better. That's what I kept hearing in, mom's energy. And I felt like she was projecting what her mother would say to her, like her all the fucking time, about how she is not good enough, how she's not, like, she needs to be a better person and she needs to do this better. And when she has a family, she needs to get, it's just very, 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 very negative.
Yeah, she was a very negative woman. She was also physically abusive to him. She used to lock him in the basement away from her and the sisters. And it really she wouldn't let him be who he needed to be. So I think that's part of where his rage comes from, his mom. And she was also known to possibly have borderline.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And I got to stress that there's a bad rap about borderline personality disorder, and I think we've talked about this before in prior podcasts. I can't stop talking about it in live streams. It has a bad rap. People think that because somebody has borderline personality disorder, that they're automatically, narcissistic, or they're automatically too wounded to be in a relationship, or too wounded to be around because they're very toxic people. However, there's another token of borderline. There's an ability to feel your feelings so deeply. And with that disorder also comes the swing of different polarized emotions. So you can be happy one minute and then sad the next, and then angry the next, and then you feel like everyone's against you. Within an hour time, you've been through every possible swing of emotion. And then you've built a whole story around those emotions, right? And it's all just projections of the past. So when somebody says, oh, well, they had borderline, or they had this, what we're really saying is they have a lot of trauma that's unhealed, they're wounded, and they're deeply in their wounds.
Yeah.
And because of that, they, will usually pick somebody out and scrutinize everything about them.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, and I just think that also I just feel like kids who grow up in a house where they can't be themselves just struggle their whole adult life trying to find who they are. And I think that played into his life and what he ended up doing.
Right.
You know?
Well, and I wouldn't, and I think everything does boil down to a choice when we really factor it in. And as much as I want to say that he had a choice in all of that, because I feel like everyone inherently has choices that they can make or not make, I feel like his choice to be caught was him taking back his power, was realizing that, like, nothing is going to actually, help him overcome this. Because I feel like there was parts of him that felt like, because I keep seeing him committing an act with, I believe he beheaded some of his victims,
yes,
right?
He did.
So I see him committing some acts with some of the heads.
Yes.
And after finishing it, it's like just sitting there in such discomfort because it did not take care of how he felt. It didn't fix anything that he was really feeling. So it feels so awful. Like, it feels so, like, and when I'm sitting, like I'm seeing from like a third person view of him, like sitting in what looks like a work truck.
Yeah.
And he's got this head, and he's just like sitting there, and it's like this agony of like, it's not doing anything to fix how he feels. And I feel like there's this loneliness and this separation from a reality in that way, and not like he was a delusional or anything like that. It was just that there's some deep loneliness that I feel, and when I feel very separate from the world around me. And I don't feel like I'm above the law, but I feel like I can have whatever I want and it's still not enough. And it's so interesting that I'm seeing that from his angle when his father was, seeing it from something completely different. And I feel like he, like when I look at, like his dad and his mom, I just like feel so gross. And I feel so like, how did I come from them?
Yeah.
And why, what was my point of being here? And feeling like just ashamed, so deep humiliation wounds. And it's so interesting because I do feel like at times he did try to overcompensate in different areas of his life, like where he tried to be a good guy, tried to do the right thing. But he didn't get noticed for that. He didn't get the acknowledgement. And instead it made him even more enraged and angry.
Yeah. And then also you brought up the point about coming from his parents. When the mom and dad divorced, he was with the mom, and then it was like no parent wanted him. Then he ended up going to the grandparents, and then because the dad didn't want him. And then after he got released from the mental hospital after killing his grandparents, he went back to live with his mom, but she didn't want him. So I think he just always felt so unwanted from anybody in his family. And I think as a child that really hurts, because even though you feel like your parents don't want you, you still love them, and that's all you crave for, so
yeah. And it's like I keep wanting to say in his energy, what in the name of quantum entanglement has happened? And if you think about the context of quantum entanglement, it would make a lot of sense that Kemper had experienced that energetically, where there was both there was not really it just feels like there's so much energy around him, almost like I'm seeing like a ball of energy that's just constantly intertwined with one another, and there's no definitive differentiation between the energies. So I feel like we're talking about identity and trying to find our identity in different ways, and I feel like his exploration with killing was not it was not from an identity standpoint. It was strictly from the standpoint of trying to release out what he was holding inside of him. And so let's kind of talk a little bit about his experience, leading up to his capture. It looks like energetically, at least what I'm picking up, is the feeling of it's like, again, I feel separate. I feel alone. I'm longing to be noticed. And I feel like in some ways, even the act of killing for him, in some ways kind of got him to feel noticed. The reactions that he got from his victims, it feels like there's like an actual, it's like I'm getting a reaction. I'm getting attention. You know how like, whether it's good attention or bad attention, when you felt your loneliness in your life, it's like you wanted some sort of attention.
Right.
Or like someone that you are with, maybe they're not giving you the attention that you crave, so you act out in certain ways to kind of get either a negative reaction or a positive, just some sort of freaking reaction.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I feel like with him. It was like I was looking to get a reaction, because it made me feel like I was connected for a brief moment. And it's interesting as I say that, because that's what it feels like. In a brief moment, I felt like I was connected. I felt respected. I felt acknowledged. I felt like someone was taking me seriously. And I feel like he had an amazing side of him where people would look at him and think he was just this amazing little teddy bear that they could hug and cuddle,
yes.
and that he was sweet and he could fix things and he could handle, life around him. But then on the other hand, he also had this very sinister, darker side where he didn't have the control, that he felt he could have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of people said that about him. He was this big teddy bear, nice guy, well-spoken. Nobody had seen that anger or rage in him at all. So based on the brutality of what he did to his victims, they just couldn't see it.
I think people want to believe that if you commit such heinous acts,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like people have to demonize it so badly, because then it makes it easier to deal with and fathom that someone is capable of that. I think the more that it's humanized, the more that it becomes something scary, because then, you could do it, or the next person that you could do it too.
The neighbor next door can do it, yeah.
But I feel like we are entering an era of, for humanity's sake, where violence is increasing. There's a lot of upheaval going on, and as that upheaval is happening, there's a lot of changes that are required to feel, I guess, what was I gonna say, changes that are required to then see the bigger picture, or then to feel like you're interconnected and interwoven and stuff. And I think we need to have more conversation about the violence that occurs, the different crimes that happen, because these are humans, and not all these humans are going postal. A lot of them are just having physical manifestations of the deep wounds they're carrying within them.
Yeah.
And we need more awareness of mental health, and more empowerment away from fear. Yeah,
I totally agree. And I feel like, and it's funny that you bring that in, because Ed Kemper said that when he was institutionalized, that he felt that he could trick the system. And it was because he was smart, but he also worked with the psychologists, and he also helped with psychologists with their testing. So he learned a lot about the testing, how to control the testing. And I think it's just interesting that he just felt like the system failed him too.
Well, and, we're not talking about someone who's just got, if you think about IQ, right? And an emotional Q, which is a whole nother layer of we're talking about emotional intelligence. There's people kind of try to, society tries to find some sort of physical understanding of what's all spiritual. And when I say all spiritual, when we're talking energy, right? People don't realize that a lot of souls come in here and they are evolved. And evolved does not necessarily mean that they're coming into Earth in these bodysuits and they're becoming gurus like the Dalai Lama, or they're becoming some sort of majestic, spiritual man or spiritual woman. A lot of them also are in these bodysuits where they commit heinous acts, and they have the ability to be at such a different level of consciousness, and they use that in a way that then deals with their emotions. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
doesn't it sound bizarre to say it that way?
That way, yeah.
But that's like Ed Kemper. He hasn't been in front of the review board yet because he hasn't passed away, right? Because when you pass away, you go into this light, and then through this light, then you end up in what's called the review board. It's usually in front of a council of elders who then review your karmic, attachments, karmic cycles that you had on Earth and what you did on Earth. Then from there, you can then either go into another bodysuit, or you can then go into other realms or different dimensions and travel to a different planet or whatever the case is. But a lot of times, once you've entered Earth School, you have to continue through the different levels of what is required, the different levels of consciousness that you have to be in to then evolve to the next step. And you cannot understand the full meaning or magnitude of your journey unless you've experienced both sides of it. So meaning, and I've said this many times before, in various past lives, there was a period of time where I was going on dates and I was attracted in women who I had killed in other lifetimes, and they would get the same heart racing feeling, and they'd be like, oh my gosh, I just must be so nervous around you, and I'm like, oh no, actually. So I ended up clearing a lot of karma with those girls, because I was just like, you know what, let's do it like a quick technique, because I'm just like, I'm never going to see you again after this. Like, I'm not going to be able to, like, this is just going to need to end, and they would go, oh, is it possible we could clear it and still date? Like, no. So you came here for a reason. But it was fascinating because as I came through some of those experiences with different women, I was like, wow, like, there's so many people that they don't know that, and then they get entangled with this particular energy, and then it becomes this karmic cycle of transactions. And it's because that in that consciousness in the prior life, there's a debt that needs to be paid. And so at a certain point, you can evolve out of that energy where you don't owe another debt to another soul, because in reality, that debt, once you evolve to a certain level of consciousness, you're above that level of debt.
Wow.
And so your ripple effect of being in a higher level of consciousness is sitting at a different vibration or a different tier of energy, which then will ripple out in a different way, right? Which then will have a different impact, which then cancels out that debt.
Interesting.
So a big factor here is needing to make sure that you're really understanding that what we're seeing on a grand scale with all these different violent acts that are done. A lot of those people, because we could sit back as humans and go, well, they're going to have to come back to Earth many more times. No, actually, a lot of those people are experiencing their polarity. That experience that they had, and it's not just about choice, it's also the roles that they play. And so when I look at Ed Kemper, I don't feel like he has to come back to Earth, because his conscious level, it's not just an intelligence that he had in a bodysuit. That's coming from eons of different experiences that he's had within that soul. That he's then bringing into this earth. And so, yeah, when he was saying that he could cheat the system or he could understand the system, his conscious level was too far above the people that were around him. That's why people needed to study him. The same thing with Ted Bundy.
Right.
That's why they needed to study him, because his conscious level rose above that. He knew he could cheat the system. He knew he could override certain things. And then we could sit here as humans and say, well, they couldn't get caught, for too long, but they did eventually get caught. Well, that's neither here nor there. That's part of an experience, for a soul. But at the end of the day, we're talking about different tiers of consciousness where at a certain point you can see from such a bird's eye view the different levels of what everyone else is experiencing. And that would be why somebody like Ed Kemper, having a high level of consciousness and then coming in and choosing actions to then manipulate, control, and deceive, you could factor in the programming that he received as a child.
Right.
That goes into play for why he behaved in that way. Because take a kid who did have a high level of consciousness like Ed Kemper and put him in a healthy environment where the programming that he would receive is emotional regulation, empathy, kindness, and generosity, then that would teach him a whole nother context, and then he would grow up and become something completely different. But instead, he was in this environment, in this I don't know, to me it looks like a town that he was raised in. Where was he raised? I keep wanting to be like, it just gives small town vibes.
California. Well, that's where he lived with his dad, was in California. I'm not sure where he lived with his mom. I could look it up.
Yeah, where did he live with his mother? Because that's a big factor for why, that also, and think about it too, environments that we're raised in, not just it's not just the parents that we have, it's the house that we're raised in, it's the neighborhood that we're raised in, it's the things beyond that. And I will say this, coming from a childhood abuse, my whole street, meaning every single kid, there were like probably 5 different families of kids on our street, and we all kind of grew up in elementary school and into middle school and then off to high school. Mm-hmm. Every single one of those kids on my street were severely abused by their family, and that's significant.
That is, yeah.
Meaning the environment, like the actual, and that was in Inkster, Michigan. And it's like, and I feel like that whole court, you heard a lot about crime. It wasn't like, petty crime. It was more like violence, domestic violence, mm-hmm. Or some sort of family dysfunctional, like neglect or fraud. Was a big thing in that community. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about where you're living, and the constructs of, just even the energy space that you're in and why you're attracted to certain places, that definitely has an impact on your programming that you receive, mm-hmm. especially as a young child. So if he's coming from different homes and nobody really wanted him and he was kind of bouncing around, that alone is an environmental factor to his programming that he received. And now that isn't to take away from his right to choose, because he was at a conscious level where he could have chosen something different. But one could argue that with the type of programming that you receive, that can shape you completely different. And I think that's why we can sit back and say, you take a good person and you put them in a bad environment, they become bad. You take a bad person and you put them in a good environment, they become good.
Right.
So those are big factors, where you sleep, where you eat, where you drink, where you take a shit.
Right.
It all impacts the way that you perceive the world.
It's really interesting. So he did grow up in a small town called Helena, Montana as a child. And then after his parents were divorced, he moved to Alameda, California with his dad. And then he ended up living with his mother in Santa Cruz, California, where he ultimately killed her.
Okay. So, kind of can leave that open for a second. Yeah. So I kind of want to, so Helena, you said Helena, Montana?
Montana, yeah.
When I feel into Helena, Montana, the actual town that we're referencing, my throat feels constricted. So I feel like, especially in the time that he was spending there, I feel like it was riddled in this, like, we act this way, we behave this way, we're good, we do good things, we all go to church, we try to behave in the way that's like the appropriate thing and the appropriate way to be. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, yeah.
And like, so, and everybody knew everybody, and it's like, oh, did you hear about so-and-so's kids and like what they're doing? Oh yeah, like, and it was like just that kind of vibe, for that time period especially. So it feels constrictive and isolating in some ways as well. And so that energetically is a whole nother story. It doesn't matter how much a child or a person spends in that environment. It's about the energy beneath it.
And it's so funny because it was definitely a small town environment. It was a close-knit community where everybody knew each other, just like you said. And also, they reported that, like many small towns, domestic violence and unreported crimes were issues behind closed doors.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's because the family has a higher, the town has a higher level of shame that's within the construct of that particular environment. And here's the interesting thing. This is the other part of this that fascinates me. Energy signatures are always around us, and that's like literally like the spores in the air where the environment was. And as a professional psychic medium, I've been to homes and been to like properties and different places where if you stand there long enough, you can see movies playing out over and over. They're on a loop over and over again. And that's an energy signature of what happened in that environment. Like, we're going to be going to Queen Mary at some point.
Right.
And my goodness, that's going to have its own energy signatures. And from a quantum level, that's going to be fascinating to, talk about and, kind of address like the big, like scrutiny behind what makes a place haunted, and versus going to like, I don't know, the South, on the east side of the country where there was a lot more segregation and slavery, and then there was the Civil War and all the stuff that happened that has energy signatures that are so potent. And when you think about potency, I'm talking about a high vibration of rage, anger, and that vibration then sits in there. Versus like take like Sedona, Arizona. It's got those vortexes where it's constantly rejuvenating and renewing the energy. And then people that have moved there, have settled there. They've created laws to keep intact the beauty of that place, even to the point where even the signage has to be in ordinance with the environment that's around. So that's why McDonald's has the certain color sign, like it's the only like blue sign or blue or turquoise sign that you can find anywhere in the world. And it's because there's an ordinance to try to keep the sanctity of the environment itself. And if you've ever been to Arizona and in Sedona, it's unlike anything, energetically. And and it's funny because there's some spiritual people that say, I don't resonate with Sedona, that it's a scary place. Like, it's just too much energy. No. If you're spiritual, and I mean like quantum level kind of spiritual, you'll go to Sedona and you will have a freaking experience, and it will be unlike anything. And it's because of those vortexes. Yeah. They're just very, very powerful.
I don't think I ever took energy signatures into place. And I think that's why, like, when you go somewhere, you're like, I just don't, like, right away, I can't live here, or I can't be in this town or this state. Like, this state is not for me. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I don't think I've ever thought of it that way.
Everything is an energy signature. Every house, it's in the cellular level of the wood or the drywall, every single thing. And in order to have it, and even like a clean home that's never had, and that's why I find it so fascinating. There's times where people have haunting experiences when they enter a new home that has never had people before it.
Is it because of the land?
It's the energy signature. It's who built the fucking house. It's like you got to factor all of that in to why something appears the way that it appears. Like, for instance, I had a client a while back who, this is just a side note, she was having some weird phenomenon and experiences, on her property and, in her home. And when I peered into her energy and then into the house, I saw a passed away gentleman who was a surveyor. And he was like saying she needs to do this and this and this, and she needs to go have her land surveyed again because she's not understanding that her property line is different, and there's an argument going on between the neighbors. And so I sat with this, client, and I'm like, so you guys have an argument going on with the neighbors about like your property line? And she's like, deer in the headlights, like, oh my God, like, yes, like that's exactly. And I said, okay, so there's a surveyor here and blah, blah, blah. And I'm describing him. Apparently they knew each other, and it was like this whole thing. And like, he's been on the property before and surveyed the property. And so he's like, you need to get it surveyed, And I said, I feel like you guys need to get this handled in a way that's like involving like legal, here, because you guys are arguing about something that is just so to get it surveyed. And she was just laughing. She's like, that makes so much sense. And I was talking about why he was acting that way. And it was because at one point he had something to do with the property. He wasn't necessarily living there, but he had something to do with it. So his energy signature was on the property. And then when they started having arguments and they even brought up, man, we just need a surveyor. Well, then comes
the surveyor.
Yes. Yes, and that's how quickly and how much we then can call something in without even knowing. And when I say something, I'm not talking about dark energy even, because that's not what, this world thinks, that there's something devious or some demon or some monster. And we're talking about energies that just kind of flow in freely. And so when I'm talking about like quantum entanglement and things like that, I feel like I'm referencing where we lost the definitive understanding of what we are within the energy that's around us. That's like this like ball of energy now that's being consuming. It's all consuming, right?
Right.
And so I feel like, that's what, like, kind of getting back into Ed Kemper, his environment absolutely had a direct correlation into why he, behaved in the ways that he behaved as well.
So do you think he was more intuitive than he thought, and he was?
Oh, absolutely, 1,000%. And I feel like in the moments where he perceived himself as being very intelligent,
It was intuition.
it was intuition. And also intuition, it's interesting because I've been doing a lot more research about intuition in the past few years, and I feel like there's something to be said about even what I understood as intuition. What do you think intuition is?
Like that gut feeling you get about something or something.
That's not intuition.
Yeah.
That gut feeling is a part of your clairsenses, which is your psychic. Intuition is a sense of knowing that is unlike anything. You don't have a declaration of understanding about it. There's no logic that gives you the sense of knowing that is within that.
Okay.
So in intuition can be on a soul level, like your soul embodying that and knowing something. It also can be spirit coming in and giving you a thought, and there's no, like, it's usually a higher vibrational energy that's coming in, such as like an angel or whatnot that comes in and then like gives this sense of knowing to you, gives you a sense of like a thought, and you just know. And it's like, and there's no question. Oh, I'm questioning this. I don't really know. It's like you feel it in your bones and you can't explain it, but you just know.
Yeah.
And that, I feel like Ed Kemper had a lot of that. A lot of that. And one might even say, well, where was his intuition when he was killing people? Well, guess what, guys? Intuition can work for you, or it can work in a negative factor.
Yeah.
It's not that everything is all love and light and positive, and that is the polarity within it. Is everything boils into a choice, and what we perceive as like low vibration is also considered high vibration in one instance too. And that's why, like that quantum healer guy that I was talking to at the crystal shop, you remember? He was talking about Dante's Inferno, and he was talking about how even in the concept of hell, there's at the very core, there isn't fire, right. It is ice. And so that then would null and quantify even some polarity where it's all one thing versus another thing. What if, in fact, it is like canceling the other two out so it becomes neutral? So it's just this designated like space of nothingness.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know if maybe I'm talking too, like too woo-woo for some people, but where I'm going with this is that, in the context of right and wrong, there is nothing in between.
Yeah, because they cancel each other out.
Right.
Right.
And like a lot of my light being guides will talk about there being no beginning, no end, right? Like that's in the Bible, right? And they talk about infinity, and then they also talk about a space of nothing, where there is no polarity within. No polarity at all. Polarity is an illusion of being human. And that like blew my mind, because I'm like, well, our humanness, our intelligence, we need to understand stuff, and we can only understand through polarity.
Right.
But that's an illusion, because energetically there is no right and wrong, and and yes, there is just balance. There's nothing in between any of it. It just is. So I don't know if that makes sense. What I'm saying, probably didn't expect that from an Ed Kemper like series. But actually, funny enough, I feel like I expected that, because Ed Kemper is very smart, and and I had a theory before even coming into this. I'm like, I bet you when we're talking about smartness, we're talking about the level of consciousness that people are not aware of, and I feel like this alone is just. And yes, people do heinous acts to others, and that needs to be handled, and there needs to be consequences, and even a reformation that happens with that. But I also feel like a lot of people feel like they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And I feel like Ed Kemper was trying everything he could to try to release out the negative feelings that he had. So with that said, he did those actions and then came to the conclusion that he was never going to feel better about anything. So that's why he turned himself in and asked for help, because he felt like he couldn't overcome that. And out of all the serial killers that we have looked at, read, and channeled, not one of them have done it that way.
No. And he also is one of the only ones that wasn't looking to be famous either. Didn't want any book deals, didn't want any interviews. The only interviews he would do would be the FBI profiling to help them.
And boy, did he help them.
Yeah. And that was it. He didn't want any fame. He was also like a model prisoner. Well, is a model prisoner. Worked in the library because he's, feeding his intelligence, and also audiobooks. But they said like he's a model prisoner, and they say that's very rare for people in high crimes. Well,
and he wanted to think about it, structure, and there's like a security within structure.
Yeah.
There's a feeling of being not alone when you're in structure. So I would imagine he would never want to leave prison, and he'll never actually leave prison because that there's like this profound, there is a part of him that's self-punishing, that doesn't feel he can ever be more. Right. But then there's also the other part of this where there's a duty within owning the crimes that he did and choosing to stay in it.
Yeah, and it's that comfort of knowing, like you said, that comfort in knowing of a routine. It's like what kids get, right?
Where would I keep thinking in his energy, where would I go if I wasn't here? Where would I go? So I would venture out to say it would be so lonely if he wasn't.
Yeah.
In prison. And so I feel like out of all the killers, here I go, redemption. That is shocking to me.
Does he actually feel redemption, though? Because he's never actually apologized for any of the killings either.
No, I feel like it did justice.
Yeah.
Like in his eyes, it feels like the crimes that were committed were there's not remorse. I started to say remorse earlier, and then I caught myself because it doesn't feel like remorse, but it does feel like guilt.
I see.
So, but not guilt oh, I'm so sorry for doing that. It's, I know if I was ever released, I'd do it again because there's just now that I know I can do it, I just want to do it.
Yeah.
Kind of like how sometimes especially like a polar bear, I'm kind of obsessed with predators, right? Like I was obsessed with every shark possible, studied it since I was a little kid, and then I got into bears, and I was obsessed with Kodiak bears. I'm still kind of a little bit obsessed with Kodiak bears, but polar bears in particular are my fascination as well. Once they've actually experienced killing a human, they usually have to be put down immediately because the likelihood of that occurring again, is most likely. And here's the kicker about that: it's not because they've tasted the blood and now that's all that they want.
Right.
It's the programming that came from it. So now they're going now they've been programmed in that way, and now it's like almost like this download that you can't undownload.
It's like they're prey now.
Yes. They can't see it any other way. So then they become opportunistic, and usually it's a juvenile polar bear that would even remotely do something like that. However, there has been known, because you don't want to be near a polar bear because they'll just come over and figure you out and get in there. But they're very it's a programming. So then one could say even a serial killer, once they have that programming, could they really heal that kind of download that they receive?
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. To think of it in that way, that it's now programmed and they're doing it because they just can't help but doing it because it's part of it.
Kind of like the conditioning of how a scientists put the fleas into this jar, and then they reproduce, and they were there for about 48 hours, and then they released the fleas and they removed the jar, and the fleas stayed in the exact same shape of the jar and did not go into any other part of the room. And it was because their programming, their conditioning had occurred already, and that was the deviation of getting out of that programming would be so out of the norm, out of the condition, out of the program, that they won't do it. So one could even factor in, and then that also, that programming is then passed on to each generation after that. And so factor in these bodysuits that we have from a generational standpoint, to defy what you have been programmed to do would be so outside of the norm.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to do it. It is possible. There's a lot of people that can do it, but I think it factors into a set amount of dysfunctional behaviors that are within the family unit.
Mm-hmm.
Like for my family unit, I was the scapegoat. I was always the problem for everything, and it worked for me. Because if I hadn't had been the problem, if I hadn't been the black sheep of the family, the one that was always rebelling against everything, and oh, Brittany, here we go again. She won't just be quiet and sit down. If I hadn't had that kind of treatment, then I wouldn't have had enough shame and guilt that separated me from the family, which then deviated from the programming that was within the family unit.
Oh, interesting.
So that alone set me up to then leave the family unit, leave the religion, and defy what went against the programming that I had. It's not about being strong. It's not about being brave enough to do something. It's you've been conditioned a certain way, and a lot of times you were conditioned to go outside the norm, and that conditioning actually works for you or against you in that way.
That's really interesting.
Kind of robotic when you think about it. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. It's really cool though.
Fucking love this. This episode's so interesting. So to kind of wrap up a little bit here, we didn't go into the gruesome nature of the crimes, and I don't think that we really want to go, because I feel like that would take away from what this podcast is meant to be about. We're talking about spiritual stuff,
right.
And I feel like, on the one hand, yes, some dark behaviors can be considered spiritual. However, these were gruesome, perverted acts that were done.
Yes.
And they were vile on every level.
Mm-hmm.
But I can absolutely say, tapping into his energy, not one part of me thinks he's a monster. Like every part of me sees him as a evolved soul in a human form right now, having experiences.
I don't think you've said that before about any of our serial killers, unless they've died and passed over.
Yeah. No, he's evolved.
Wow.
Yep. And I would imagine as soon as he gets on the other side, there isn't going to be any sort of conflict that he gets. There's going to be a lot of gratitude and grace. Yeah. It's fascinating. So I would wrap up this podcast saying I have a profound gratitude for what we just witnessed together. I also feel grateful for my own life and the way that I was conditioned and programmed. Because my God, we've all been conditioned and programmed, and a lot of us had programming that led us right down to the direction that we moved in because of it. Yeah. So what about you?
I definitely look at him different. I think looking at what he did to the victims was kind of shocking to me, and thinking wow, you kind of have to have something inherently wrong with you to even be able to think of some of the things that he did. But now, looking and speaking on him, I don't really feel that way about him. I don't really think he was a monster. I think that he had a lot of rage towards his mother, which he took out in a not so helpful way. But I think that's the only way he felt that he could release it. I mean, it's horrible, but I don't see him as this monster. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And we'll go ahead and close now. And we'll end again with reading the names of the victims that were lost in that experience. And these would be the confirmed victims. So starting with his grandmother and grandfather, we have Maud Kemper, 67 years old, Edmund Kemper, 72. Then we have Mary Pessy, 18 years old, Anita Luscious, 18 years old, Akiko Ku, 15 years old. Cindy Shalhale, 19 years old. Rosalind Thorpe, 23 years old. Alice Liu, 21 years old. And Clarenell Strandberg, so this would be his mother. And then also we have Sarah Hallett, 59 years old, which would be his mother's friend.
Yeah.
And so with that said, thank you for tuning in, and let us know in the comments, how did you feel about listening to this podcast, and what new information did you gain from this, or insights do you feel are important here? Thank you for joining in, and do you have anything else to say?
No, I think it's been a great podcast.
Okay, awesome.